Hello, and welcome to Module 4 of JResponse training. Again, my name is Mark S. Young, Director of JResponse at JCC Association.
And I'm Jenny Schwartz, the Director of Helping at Jewish for Good in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a social worker, trained JResponder, and a certified instructor on adult mental health first aid from the National Mental Health Council.
Jenny, I am so pleased you are here co-facilitating with me today, representing JResponders in the field and your expertise in providing relief, especially during and after a time of crisis. Let me share our PowerPoint for today. Jenny, you can see it?
I can see it.
Excellent. This is called Module 4, Relief. I'm here for you. What do you need? Jenny, why don't you share with our participants the goals and agenda for today's session?
It's really a pleasure, Mark. Thank you for inviting me, and I'd be delighted to. Today, we're going to be learning how we, JResponders, can provide initial relief, and through the techniques of mental health and psychological first aid. These include non-judgmental listening, providing reassuring information, and encouraging those impacted by trauma with self-help strategies or seeking professional help.
Thank you, Jenny. We are also going to discuss what we should not do, because as much as we want to help, our first rule is really do no harm. Lastly, a note that we will ask you to follow this session closely, because in the next session, Module 5, we will be together practicing these skills. So just to reorient ourselves, we have already discussed readiness or preparation in Module 2, and our last sessions discussed the process and strategies around resilience. Certainly these R's will be prevalent here as well. This training in itself is readiness for when you may have to come to someone's aid after crisis hits. And one of the ways you can help them is to share the resilience strategies we just talked about in Module 3. But now we are adding relief and also recovery to our virtuous cycle of JResponse, namely the social and emotional support we can provide in the days and weeks or months after a crisis. We will also be engaging in many of the same skills when we learn about recovery in the much longer term, and how these skills can support and impact a person's healthy progression towards post-traumatic growth, which we will define shortly. Jenny?
Thank you, Mark. Let's start our learning together by putting our learning in context, hearing from another one of our JResponders, Sherry from the Posttraumatic JCC in Toronto, who are among 20 JResponders who deployed to Pittsburgh the weekend of October 27, 2019, to support the JCC and the community 1 year after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting.
Sherry, thank you for coming out, and we appreciate everything you've done. But tell us about your experience with JResponse and going over to Pittsburgh.
Last winter, when I was at the JCCA Professional Conference, I heard a keynote speaker talking about JResponse, which is an initiative of the JCC Association, where JCC professionals go to JCCs across North America to help out if there's a time of crisis. Then the Tree of Life synagogue shooting happened, and some of our senior staff went to Pittsburgh. Now the 1-year anniversary was going to be coming up, so I went, and I was one of 17 JCC professionals from across North America who supported the staff at the Pittsburgh JCC for that weekend that commemorated the 1-year anniversary of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting.
So you get off the plane, and what do you see?
When I got off the plane, the first thing that I saw when I walked into the terminal was their signage that said "Strength, Not Hate," and the Pittsburgh Steelers logo had been adapted to include a Jewish star. And I thought that was absolutely remarkable, and it was everywhere.
So tell me more about JResponse as a whole.
It's about being a community, a bigger community, helping each other. A woman came in and was telling me that she wasn't Jewish, but she lives across the street from the synagogue, and she had lost her husband not that long ago. When she was coming home that day, everything was shut down. She couldn't get to her house because the police had barricaded off the area, and she said it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And she went to the JCC, knowing that, that would be a safe place to go. And the people there were welcoming, and they were warm, and it was a place where people were able to just go and be. It was a really rewarding experience, and being the director of the Early Childhood Center here at the Posttraumatic JCC, work very hard to, try and help the children understand Jewish values like tikkun olam, just helping to heal the world, and tzedakah and chesed and, acts of kindness. And this just totally exemplifies that in real life. And I think that's an important aspect of who we are as a Jewish community, and who we are as a Jewish people, that we help. We go where we're needed and we help.
Jenny, what a powerful video from Sherry and the Prosserman JCC. And what a great example of seeing just being present and listening and being supportive can go a long way in helping people recover from trauma. In so many ways, that is what JResponse is all about.
Totally agree with you, Mark. So let's get learning with the skills, shall we?
We shall. And if I may, as we do, like we're doing for all of these sessions, let's start with studying a bit of Jewish text to lay the foundation, the Jewish foundation for our learning. Now, this text comes from the Talmud, or the oral law of the Jewish people. It's in the tractate Berachot 7a, which is kind of like a chapter or a division of the Talmud. And this text responds to a question made by the rabbis of, why does God pray? One answer may be the following. May it be my will, or God's will, that my mercy will overcome my anger or my judgment towards Israel for their transgressions. And may my mercy prevail over my other attribute, through which Israel is punished. And may I conduct myself toward my children, Israel, with the attribute of mercy, and may I enter before them beyond the letter of the law. What does this mean, and how does this make sense for us? This text talks about mercy over anger or issuing judgment. For us as JResponders, we may get angry at the situation in which we are responding to, and we may unintentionally pass judgment when we might hear something from someone we're engaging with as we engage in listening to people's struggles. We must remember, though, it is not about us.
I see where you're going with this, Mark. To act properly as JResponders, we must act with mercy and separate our own needs and prescriptions for the situation from what our fellow person is struggling with, and just listen without judgment in order to be of proper service.
Exactly, Jenny. And whether you believe in God or not, or a divine image or not, acting in this way fulfills what Jewish tradition would say is our larger purpose. We must act with compassion and with mercy in order to create a better world, and to do so without bringing anger or our own judgments and our own challenges to the table. That's what providing relief is all about, and what we will be concentrating on for the balance of this video.
Wow, that was amazing, Mark, and really illuminates for me the purpose of this work on a very deep level. And if I may, we'll incorporate this as we talk about our skills for today. Let me first say that what we are going to talk about today is just a window into what a full day course certification in mental health first aid. To be clear, this session does not certify you as a mental health first aid responder, but it does introduce you to key concepts that you'll be able to practice and then apply as a JResponder, both from the National Mental Health Council and from JResponse's partner, Israel. If you're interested, you can advance your JResponse training by taking the full mental health first aid course through the National Mental Health Council, and you can be in touch with Mark to learn more about how. Let's also be clear that the skills you are learning today does not only have to be applied when being deployed as a JResponder. You may be some or all of these on this slide, and in each relationship, you can deploy your JResponder skills. For in each role, you are an empathetic individual who can be a presence for others, having conversations, and you can notice things.
Exactly, Jenny. We are all some or several of the things on this slide. And it's also important to say that unless you're licensed on your own, JResponders are not licensed medical or health professionals. If at any point someone needs more than first aid, encourage them to seek professional support. And we'll talk more about this shortly.
So an important note, mental health first aid techniques are best used at the onset of a crisis, during a period of early intervention. Providing a listening ear and providing reassuring information during this time can help those struggling on a better course for recovery, helping to mitigate the trauma they may experience from a traumatic event. This is where mental health first aid can best contribute. JResponders are best suited to help inside the green box. As a JResponder, prevention may be out of our control, especially because we are likely coming to a situation after it has occurred. But knowing resources that can help someone with treatment or continued help can be extremely beneficial. If it happens in your community, you may know the resources, but if it is in another community, there will hopefully be resources available for you to pass on.
So what are our goals when providing relief? This language comes to us from IsraAid and their work in psychological first aid, which differs from mental health first aid slightly, more focusing on the distress caused by traumatic events and the adaptive functioning responders hope can encourage in those affected post a crisis. The 3 psychological first aid guiding principles are restoring feelings of safety, reducing stress, and regulating emotions. That's our aim here, as well as helping those we are responding to employ more adaptive behaviors such as coping and flexibility, and all of them to better access the resources already present. These include the resilience strategies you learned and the other licensed medical professionals you can refer them to. Jenny?
Thanks, Mark. And very helpful for us to understand what we are trying to achieve as we now talk about the specific mental health first aid skills. We're going to be focusing on 2 skills today, listening non-judgmentally and giving reassurance and information. And it is important to put these skills in context of a larger model that the National Mental Health Council uses when training mental health first aid. The model is called ALGE and stands for A, assess for risk of suicide or harm, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance and information, encourage appropriate professional help, and encourage self-help and other support strategies. Now, just a note here that in the full mental health first aid course, we review all 5 steps, and that the A is really an important one. It is important to reiterate the saying of the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority. If you see something, say something. If you feel at any point that someone may be harmful to themselves or others, tell someone, don't ignore it. Remember, as a JResponder, you are never alone. You are always part of a team.
You are absolutely right, Jenny. And we are all in this together. So let's focus on the L, listening non-judgmentally. Let's first talk about the why behind this skill, and then we'll focus on the how to do it and what to do. First, the why. Our goal here, again, utilizing language from our partners at IsraAid, is that we want people to find calm and relaxation, which is often quite difficult during and in the days and weeks after a crisis hits. In order to meet this why, we must listen to people who wish to share their stories and emotions. Remember, people react differently to disasters, and there is no right or wrong way to feel. So let's reserve judgment when we listen to them. And be friendly and compassionate, even if people are being difficult. Remember, it's about them, not about you or us.
That's right, Mark. And if you want an easy way to remember how to listen non-judgmentally, remember your B's.
Remember your B's, huh?
No, Mark, not the letter B. The BE, how you want to be when you're listening non-judgmentally. These include be genuine and respectful, be careful about using slang, be comfortable with silence, be in the present with the person without comparisons to yourself, be aware that the person's feelings are very real, be accepting even though you may not agree, be aware of your body language and facial expression, be positive with your feedback, and be helpful with language without telling them how to feel or how they should feel. This skill isn't easy and takes a good amount of practice. We'll do some practicing around this together in our next live module.
That is right, Jenny. And here are a few other instructions in order to listen non-judgmentally. Use I statements. State non-judgmentally what you have noticed or observed. You can ask questions, but don't push. Only let people speak if they really want to speak. Realize it may be a relief for the person to talk about how she, he, or they feel. And remember, it's about them, not about you. Their experiences are not the same as yours. Their perspective is not the same as yours. Their culture may not be the same as yours. What they really need is our empathy, and they may use language that make you or us uncomfortable.
Now, we know that is a lot of information to take in. And again, listening non-judgmentally on its own takes practice. This next skill is the listening's complement. how to respond in conversation while being a supportive presence, And we do this by giving reassurance and information. It's almost easier to tell you what not to do here, but we'll try to keep our language positive. So let's go through this slide. You should be prepared to have realistic expectations, offer consistent emotional support, give the person hope, provide practical help, provide information, and acknowledge the limits of what you can do. Similarly, be cautious not to. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Do not give advice. Do not dismiss the problem or emotions. Focus on right versus wrong. Do not focus solely on weight, food, drugs, alcohol, injury, or specific external factors unless there's an emergency. Try not to fix the problem yourself, and do not engage in communication that is belittling, sarcastic, hostile, or patronizing.
Okay, Jenny, that is a lot. Can you share some examples of this and kind of bring this to life a little bit?
Sure thing, Mark. You can see on this slide what is an example of reassuring information versus giving advice. I'll read a few out. Reassuring information can sound like, social isolation can be tough. It's natural for you to be hurt and upset. Advice would sound like, I'm quarantined too, okay? Here's what you need to do. Another example of reassuring information is you are not alone. An example of advice in that is, you'll get over this, just don't worry so much about it. The goal here is to keep to the type of statements on the left of our screen. We want to provide encouragement, but not to tell people what to do. We want them to know that they aren't alone, but we also don't want them to think we know how they are feeling or the best course of action, because we don't. We can't. We are not them, and we don't know exactly how or what they are feeling.
Well put, Jenny. And there is real purpose to this approach. Ultimately, the person struggling will need to be the driving force behind their own recovery. We can't impose, but we can encourage. And part of this is helping them understand that there is no way they or anyone can go back to how they felt or what their lives were prior to this crisis or disaster event. It's impossible, and as a result, unachievable. So our job as JResponders is to be a person on their journey, whether towards the beginning, which is relief, or later on, recovery, to help them begin to experience post-traumatic growth, or PTG. Again, borrowing this language from our friends at IsraAid, PTG is experienced in 5 factors. Appreciation of life as it is now. New possibilities. What has now opened up for their lives that might be positive even as a result of this disaster? Personal strength. A new sense that they have the strength and will to move forward. Relating to others, that they want to engage with others and the world again. Spiritual change. A belief again in the possible, in hope and in optimism. Now, this is important. Post-traumatic growth and negative post-traumatic impacts can and likely will coexist simultaneously and independently. That's okay. That's going to be a natural part of the process. This isn't a linear process, but our work, just by listening and providing reassurance and information, is key in helping others focus on the goal of post-traumatic growth, even while negative impacts exist and might persist. Now, it may be helpful to think about our role providing mental and emotional relief through this mix of do's and don'ts, because as much as we want to help, it is important to remember that individuals caught up in a crisis become quite vulnerable, and we do not want to cause them any further harm. Thus, if you follow these do's and don'ts, you'll be in great shape in your JResponse service. First, the do's. Encourage practical suggestions on how people can help themselves. Help people regain their sense of control by engaging them in activities to meet their own needs. Acknowledge and support the person's strength, their competence, their courage, and their power, which helps them restore a sense of control and feeling that they're resilient. Allow people to determine the kind of assistance they want to receive and the pace of self-disclosure. And ask, have you gotten through tough times before? Helping them thinking about how they can relate to their other past experiences, given the experience they're having. And encourage them, if they can, if they want to contribute to the relief operation. Give them something to do could be just as one of the greatest things for them as they navigate this challenging time. Jenny, how about those don'ts?
You got it, Mark. And these don'ts are intentionally reinforcing much of what we have already learned today. Don't force people to share their stories. Don't give simple reassurance such as everything will be all right, or at least you survived, or I know how you feel, because again, we don't know any of these things and we don't want them to feel guilty about their situation. Don't tell people what they should be feeling, thinking, or doing. Don't tell people how they should have acted earlier. Don't make promises that cannot be kept. And don't criticize existing services or relief recovery activities in front of people in need of these services. It's best to say, I'm here for you. What do you need? Now, what can we do after or as we listen non-judgmentally and give reassurance and information is to connect them to strategies or people that can aid them on their journey to post-traumatic growth. The first, and this is the first E in the ALGE model, is to encourage self-help and other support strategies. These may include explore activities that might help manage symptoms, find strategies that might interest them, discuss self-help strategies with a health professional. You can also share ideas from your own resilience building, but only as a brainstorming exercise, not as dictating. Mark?
Thanks, Jenny. The second E is to encourage appropriate professional help. Remember, JResponses are not licensed medical professionals, so do not try to do any more for the individual than you are qualified to do. What you can do is encourage them to see any number of professionals, including those listed on this slide. Note, as we talked about the importance of relationships in our readiness session, your JCC may already have relationships with many of these professionals, or maybe they work at your JCC. Let's utilize these relationships here and encourage individuals to seek out the help they might need by connecting them to these individuals. The choice, of course, is up to them. Jenny?
Wow, Mark, are we coming to the end already?
I know, it's hard to believe that this went so quick.
It certainly did for me, and I hope for you watching that you have found this engaging, compelling, and clear. Let's be sure to highlight some helpful hints as we begin to review today's training. First, if you reach out or say that you'll connect with someone again, remember to keep your promises and follow up. This is part of the do no harm instruction. By saying we will stay in touch and not staying in touch, we could be doing more harm than good. And to that end, do not make promises you cannot keep. Also, remember what your role is and is not. So stick to the skills and roles we discussed today, and we'll be practicing in the next session, and encourage connecting folks to the proper individuals as appropriate. Don't put the world on your shoulders. Do what you can and seek assistance early on. Remember, we are part of a team of JResponders. Rely on your team. And as a JResponder, you can make a world of difference.
Definitely. That is the most important why it's in bold. You guys are all in this JResponse group, and I'm so happy, and Jenny, we are just so happy that you're part of this, and I hope this session is reinforcing that for you today. So let's review. Providing relief. We're going to focus when we're deploying, when we're at our JCCs, to focus on non-judgmental listening. And we follow up with that on giving reassurance and information. We can follow the do's and the don'ts we just talked about. Remembering rule number 1, do no harm. The goal is to support the journey for anyone struggling towards post-traumatic growth. And you and we are part of a team. So if you need help and you see something, say something. Remember what your role is and isn't. And as we look ahead, we were going to practice these skills together in Module 5, both as a further deep dive into relief and recovery and examining how these skills can be helpful in the short and long term.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, to complete this training, you will need to respond to one of these 4 reflection questions in a sentence or 2 response to Mark and your JResponse buddy. The questions are, how might you approach a conversation in which someone seems to be struggling differently than you have previously? Where is one instance you might try out non-judgmental listening? Can you share an example of how you may give reassuring information instead of advice? And what resilience strategies might you offer to someone? And how will you share given the guidance of today's training? Again, email Mark and your buddy a 1 or 2 sentence response to one of these questions.
Thank you, Jenny. We've come to the end. So much for facilitating this session with me. It's really been a true honor.
Mark, thank you. This was great. And I'm so proud to be contributing to JResponse in this way. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, excellent. And we're going to see all of you again for our next live session, Module 5, which will focus on relief and recovery and practicing these skills. And until then, be well, stay safe, and start thinking about how you're going to utilize these skills. Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.